Welcome back to another episode of Cracking the Code, where we decode how federal government really spends. Today, we're diving into NAICS 325412, Pharmaceutical Preparation Manufacturing. And if you're picturing billion-dollar vaccine contracts and warehouse-sized pill presses, you're not entirely wrong. But as we'll see, there's a lot more nuance here and a lot more opportunity. I've got Mon with me, our data brain, and Rena, who's going to help us all connect how these numbers go into real-world strategy.
Hey, Elizabeth. And yes, this one is quite heavyweight. Over 5 fiscal years, fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 24, the federal government spent over $100 billion on their NAICS 325412. It's one of the most consistently highest spending categories in the federal portfolio.
Man, that's huge. And I'm going to assume that this isn't all just a response to COVID, correct?
Exactly. There's one noticeable spike in the first quarter of fiscal year 22, about 19 billion, largely due to vaccine procurement. Roughly 12.1 billion of that went to Pfizer. But aside from that anomaly, the thread line is steady.
Got it. So COVID definitely amplified it, but the underlying demand was already there.
Pharmaceutical manufacturing in the federal space isn't just emergency stockpiles. It's the backbone of everything from VA patient care to DoD readiness and public health resiliency. So agencies rely on consistent qualified suppliers for drugs, vaccines, therapeutics, and those relationships span decades.
Great. Thanks, Rena. And all right, Mon, will you break this down for us? Who is spending all of this money?
Sure. 3 agencies dominate: Veteran Affairs, the Department of Defense, and the Health and Human Services, of course. The VA awarded 8,827 contracts worth $40.996 billion. DoD awarded 75,280 contracts totaling $40 billion. And HHS awarded 1,067 contracts for around $22 billion.
Okay, so it's a roughly an even split between the VA and DoD, with HHS not far behind.
Exactly. And each tells a different story, though. VA spending is tied to long-term recurring pharmaceutical supplies, feeding in their consolidated mail outpatient pharmacy, CMOP, system and hospital network. DoD's numbers reflect medical logistics supporting our deployed forces, the Defense Health Agency, and programs like the Troop Support Medical Supply Chain. And HHS, Health and Human Services, that's where you see the national scale initiatives like vaccine procurement, BARDA contracts, and public health readiness.
Great. And so what I'm understanding from that is there's not 3 different buyers competing for the same thing. It's 3 missions buying for different reasons.
Exactly. And that's why at BidExecs, when we analyze a client's position in this space, we always start with the mission lens, not just what your NAICS code is or what NAICS code you play in. You can't just sell the same product to the VA that you would market to BARDA or DoD. Their mission requirements are very different.
Great. And that makes so much sense. And I want to talk about the size of the players here. Are small businesses really competing under this NAICS?
Yes, but as we saw just now, context matters. So from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 24, small businesses were awarded about 11,200 contracts compared to 9,200 for large businesses. So small businesses actually won more awards numerically, but those large business awards are higher dollar multi-year contracts.
So the small firms are getting the volume, but not necessarily the value?
Exactly. And it's worth nothing. There's no major skew towards socioeconomic set-asides here. The buying behavior doesn't show a strong preference for AA, service disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, or hub categories.
And because pharma manufacturing isn't an easy entry point, it's very capital intensive, compliance heavy, regulated by both FDA and the FAR, So most small businesses that play here do so as tier 2 suppliers. They focus on providing packaging, labeling, cold chain logistics, or formulation support.
So I want to make sure I have this correct. Even if you're not making the drugs, you can still be a part of the pipeline here.
Absolutely. And that's where the strategic positioning matters.
Great. All right, ladies, let's talk about how agencies are actually buying pharmaceuticals. Because if I'm listening and I want to enter this market, I need to know where the spending happens.
Yeah, this is where most companies get lost. The government doesn't post standalone RFPs for every bottle of medication. Sometimes they do, but most often they don't. The government uses established acquisition channels, contract vehicles that act like permanent marketplaces. For anyone playing in this space, there are 5 key ones that you're probably already aware of or you should be aware of. The first one is the Veterans Affairs VA Federal Supply Schedule. It's different from GSA. So I often get companies who are confused about this. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, there's a VA Federal Supply Schedule 65, the biggest channel for recurring pharmaceutical buys across the VA, DoD, and other agencies. Then there's the DLA Troop Support Medical Supply Chain. This is focused on deployment, military hospitals, and global health readiness. HHS, BARDA, where you see vaccine R&D, countermeasures, and pandemic preparedness investments happening. The fourth is NIH and CDC IDIQs and BPAs. These are used for specialized pharmaceutical research and lab supplies. And the last one, or fifth one, there are others, but these are the top 5. And the fifth one is the Strategic National Stockpile, SNS. These are bulk procurement of national emergency and replenishment cycles.
So these are the federal equivalents of long-term supplier programs. So like essentially, if you're not in the ecosystem, you're not getting invited to the table.
Exactly. And for companies watching DLA activity, don't overlook the DIBS, the DLA Internet Bid Board System. That's where smaller or urgent pharmaceutical buys get posted. It's not where the billion-dollar vaccine contracts live, obviously, but it's a great early indicator of shifting medical supply priorities.
So DIBS is like your early radar for demand signals.
In fact, when the DLA Troop Support Medical Division, or within the DLA Troop Support Medical Division, DIBS often posts requests for pharma supplies, things like injectables, chemical preparations, saline solutions, field medical kits. So for smaller pharmaceutical or chemical manufacturers, this can be a gateway into federal contracting. The buys are smaller, but they help vendors establish performance history.
And you'd be surprised how often those small buys tend to larger IDIQ opportunities later. Agencies tend to return to vendors who respond quickly and deliver reliability.
And that's why we tell our clients at Bid Execs, before you invest in big proposal efforts, if you're new to this space or a growing business, monitor DIBS. It's not just a bid board, it's a real-time market signal that shows what the Defense Health Agency or DLA are prioritizing in the medical and pharma supply chain.
Thank you for that information, ladies. I want to take a step back here and look at the policy side of this. So we've heard a lot about reshoring, supply chain security, as well as domestic production really since 2020. Does the data reflect this shift?
We do see a gradual pattern of increased domestic manufacturing awards, especially post fiscal year 2022. The agencies began emphasizing US based API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, production and stockpile replenishment.
Yes, and that's the long-term structural trend. If you look at BARDA and DoD have both introduced incentives to localize manufacturing capacity. The idea is to reduce dependency on overseas suppliers for critical drugs and vaccines. So for contractors, that means higher scrutiny on sourcing and certification, but also more opportunity for US manufacturers and their supply chain partners.
So it's not who can make it cheaper, it's who can make it here.
Exactly. And that shift aligns with the broader federal acquisition policy, emphasizing supply chain resilience, transparency, and mission continuity.
Great, thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about the heart of this NAICS, the manufacturing. Because for companies listening who actually make pharmaceutical products, the policy environment right now feels very different than it did 5 years ago.
That's true. The data backs that up. Post 2022, we've seen measurable increase in awards tied to domestic manufacturing or sourcing requirements. A growing number of solicitations reference domestic API capacity or US-based fill finish operations as evaluation factors.
Exactly. And APIs, again, active pharmaceutical ingredients, are the foundation of drug manufacturing. So for years, the US supply chain relied heavily on offshore production, mostly China and India. But starting in around FY22, both BARDA and DoD began prioritizing contractors that can demonstrate US based or allied nation API sourcing.
So this isn't just about who can make the final drug, it's who controls the building blocks.
Right. And for manufacturers, that's a new competitive edge. Even if your company doesn't produce APIs in house, the government wants visibility into your upstream partners and traceability. So the supply chain story, who you can buy from or who you buy from, where they produce it, how resilient is that network, matters as much as your finished product.
And we are also seeing policy drivers behind that shift. Everything from the Defense Production Act investments to BARDA's domestic APIs initiatives and even pilot programs through HHS Office of Industrial Base Expansion.
Great. And for our listeners, if you are already manufacturing or formulating drugs commercially, this is where your federal opportunity begins. If you can show compliance, control, and traceability, you've got it.
Exactly. And that's where bid execs helps clients map readiness, not just whether they can bid, but whether they can meet the federal sourcing, documentation, quality assurance standards. For pharma manufacturers, it's no longer just who has the capacity game, it's who has visibility into their API chain and can prove that to the contracting office.
So this is both a challenge and a differentiator. Companies that get ahead on domestic API sourcing could find themselves potentially for a multi-year IDIQs and long-term resilience contracts.
Precisely. And again, it's not just compliance requirements, it's a strategic investment.
Let's talk about adjacency. So if somebody is already in life sciences or medical manufacturing, what's next for them, Rena?
For existing pharma contractors, expansion opportunities sit in adjacent NAICS codes, right? So we're talking 325412 today, but the adjacent NAICS codes that you could look at are 325413, which is in vitro diagnostic substance manufacturing, 541714, research and development in biotechnology, 339112, surgical and medical instrument manufacturing. Now, again, these are very different and their methods are different, but they're adjacent to the NAICS code in discussion. These categories align with the same buyers, the VA, DoD, HHS, but they target different parts of the value chain. So for instance, if you're manufacturing IV bags or diagnostic test kits, you could qualify under 325413, which is the in vitro diagnostic substance manufacturing, or 339112, which is surgical medical instrument manufacturing. So you can leverage your existing pharma compliance infrastructure across these adjacent NAICS codes and expand your market.
And we've seen several contractors transition that way. Once you're FDA compliant and understand the distribution protocols, those adjacent markets are logical expansions.
So you're not reinventing the wheel, you're just rolling it into a different direction.
Exactly. It's about strategic adjacency, not diversification for its own sake.
Awesome. And this has been a fascinating look at how the government buys and funds pharmaceuticals and really how it impacts the wider industry. Mon, do you have any final takeaways for us?
Yes, just that consistency matters here. Even without emergency spikes, the annual spend under NAICS code 325412 remains strong. Agencies are committed to long term sourcing stability, and that's not likely to change.
Yeah, and from a strategic view, for any company listening, this is about aligning your capabilities with mission demand. Whether you're manufacturing drugs, packaging, or supporting logistics, understanding the contracting environment is what unlocks opportunity. And so I would highly recommend you dig deeper into the data that Mon and her team have pulled up.
Well said, ladies. And if you do want to dive deeper into the full data set, including agency subawards, socioeconomic distributions, and quarterly patterns, you can download our full report of NAICS under 325412 at www.bidexecs.com. As always, we will keep decoding data so you can make a better strategic decision. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Cracking the Code.